This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Obama, First Lady Michelle Obama, along with thousands of mourners, packed into the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. Thursday to attend the funeral of civil rights and women's rights leader Dorothy Height. She died last week at the age of 98. Dorothy Height served as president of the National Council of Negro Women for 40 years, where she fought for equal rights for both African Americans and women. During the 1960s, she organized Wednesdays in Mississippi, which brought together black and white women from the North and South to create a dialogue of understanding. She worked closely with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and many other prominent civil rights activists. In 1971, she helped found the National Women's Political Caucus, and in the last months of her life, she took part in healthcare discussions at the White House. At the funeral service on Thursday, Camille Crosby and poet Maya Angelou were among those who paid tribute to Dorothy Height. President Obama wept during the service before taking to the podium to deliver a 13-minute eulogy. He hailed her achievements and ended by recounting one of his favorite stories about Dorothy Height.
One of my favorite moments with Dr. Height, this is just a few months ago. We had decided to put up the Emancipation Proclamation in the Oval Office. And we invited some elders to share reflections of the movement. And she came, and it was an intergenerational event. So we had young children there as well as elders, and the elders were asked to share stories. And she talked about attending a dinner in the 1940s at the home of Dr. Benjamin Mays, then president of Morehouse College. And seated at the table that evening was a 15-year-old student, a gifted child, as she described him, filled with a sense of purpose, who was trying to decide whether to enter medicine or law or the ministry. And many years later, after that gifted child had become a gifted preacher, I'm sure he had been told to be on his best behavior. After he led a bus boycott in Montgomery and inspired a nation with his dreams, he delivered a sermon on what he called the drum major instinct. A sermon that said we all have the desire to be first. We all want to be at the front of the line. The great test of a life, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, is to harness that instinct, to redirect it towards advancing the greater good, towards changing a community and a country for the better, toward doing the Lord's work. I sometimes think Dr. King must have had Dorothy Height in mind when he gave that speech. For Dorothy Height met the test. Dorothy Height embodied that instinct. Dorothy Height was a drum major for justice, a drum major for equality, a drum major for freedom, a drum major for service. And the lesson she would want us to leave with today, a lesson she lived out each and every day, is that we can all be first in service. We can all be drum majors for a righteous cause. So let us live out that lesson. Let us honor her life by changing this country for the better as long as we are blessed to live. May God bless Dr. Dorothy Height and the union that she made more perfect.
President Obama delivering the eulogy at the funeral service for Dorothy Height yesterday. Obama ordered flags to be flown at half-staff on Thursday in Height's honor. Before we look at her life and legacy, we go back to Dorothy Height in her own words. In 2005, she spoke before a massive crowd assembled on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. for the Millions More March.
I say anyway that African-American women are very special women because we're women who seldom do what we want to do, but always do what we have to do. And we know how to take care of ourselves, our families, and our communities. And I'm glad I was here 10 years ago, and I feel blessed that I have the opportunity to be here now. Then we had the Million Man March, and that was a great day because it was so uplifting, and it gave us all a new determination to do what we could to help build our families and communities. And now we are here, and we are here from all over the country, from many different backgrounds. And I think one of the things that we have learned is that we may have come to this country by different ships, but we're all in the same boat now, and that we have to learn how we work together. And in the civil rights movement, we learned that unity did not mean the same or that uniformity, but that whatever our differences, we learned to get focused.
Dorothy Height speaking at the Millions More March in Washington, D.C. in 2005. When we come back from break, we'll be joined by Stanford University professor Clayborne Carson, historian and professor of history here. Stay with us. Sweet Honey in the Rock, I Remember, I Believe. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. We're broadcasting on over 800 stations, on Pacifica and NPR stations, on low-power FM, college and community radio stations, on public access TV and PBS TV stations, and both TV satellite networks, on Dish Network Channel 9415, Free Speech TV, 9410 Link TV, and on DirecTV Channel 375. And we're video and audio podcasting at democracynow.org. Our headlines are also available in Spanish for any radio station to take, as over 250 are. Well, in this segment, we remember Dorothy Height. The funeral for her held at the National Cathedral yesterday in Washington, D.C. But we're at Stanford University in California, on the road, and are joined by Clayborne Carson, professor of history here at Stanford University, the founding director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Research and Education Institute. He met Dorothy Height a number of times. We welcome you to Democracy Now!
Good to be here.
Can you talk about her legacy? She was 98 years old when she died.
Well, she went through an era where most of the landmark civil rights reforms took place, but also where there was a transition of leadership within the black community, and she became much more prominent as the women's movement took shape during the late 1960s, and you begin to see her really flowering, actually late in her life. My memory of her last memory was at a panel discussion, and I remember she came in on she was on in a wheelchair, and she looked very frail, and she took her place on the panel. But as soon as she started speaking, that life, that spirit came alive, and you began to see that even though she was in her 90s, she was still fighting the good fight.
You're the chief archivist for Dr. King's works, in addition to being a historian. Can you talk about her relationship with Dr. King?
Well, she knew the family. I mean, she had a long connection. She had been very active even in the 40s and 50s.